Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Commission on Management Accreditation's first ever live streamed event. I'm here with two of my colleagues, Dr. Daniel Burt from the Texas A&M Kingsville. He is an associate professor and associate chair and the kinesiology graduate program coordinator. And Dr. Robert Baker of George Mason University. He is professor and interim dean for the College of Education and Human Development, director for the Center for Sport Management, director for the School of Sport, Recreation, and Tourism Management. So we are here today to talk to them as individuals, but also as sport management faculty in administrative positions. We are live streaming on a number of social media platforms, so I hope that you can join in if you want, or we will also have a recording so that you can watch it asynchronously. So the pandemic has changed the landscape in both higher education and in the sport industry. So while we have returned to something that you might think would resemble a new normal prior to March 2020, it really is not normal, and it is not yet clear if this will be the new way that things are going. So Dr. Burt and Dr. Baker are going to take your questions along the way and talk about the pandemic and its impact from their perspectives. So use the comment functions as you need to so that you can ask questions. So we're going to start talking about higher education. So from your two different perspectives, and I think this also can touch upon the differences between the two different states that you come from, Texas and Virginia, please talk about what impact COVID-19 has had during the beginning of this semester. What's going on? So I'm going to ask Dr. Baker this question first.
Sure. We have enacted at George Mason University a mandate for vaccinations for students and faculty and staff. We are running approximately 95%. Of course, we do have exemptions for certain circumstances. We have also had, over the course of the past year, a great deal of success in limiting outbreaks on campus. I think currently we're running at about 0.42%. So we're doing a lot of testing, up to 13,000 tests a week. So we have a massive effort in coming to the point where we were able to reopen the campus. We were open last year, but on a smaller scale. I feel that we're more open this year, but also with a lot of safety precautions in mind. And so, the past year we've dealt with the health and safety issues for the concept of instructional continuity and trying to maintain the work of the university, and that required a lot of pivoting at some points to online classes. We were fortunate in the college that I'm affiliated with, and that we had expertise in this area. We have supports in this area across the university. So while those shifts were stressful for everybody involved, students, staff, faculty, I think we had the capacity to make those effective. Our meetings went online, our services went online, and we actually have seen some of our events, like our open houses for potential students, have actually had record numbers of people because they've gone virtual. So we had a lot of shifts and changes. I would say that part of that, there was a good deal of stress on our leadership team because we met twice a week and things changed rapidly. And then there was no time to step away and break. It was just constant full speed ahead, trying to meet the needs, meet the demands, project what will best serve our constituency. And so that's what we've really, I think, jumped ahead with, and we've had to deal with our partners external to the university with regard to internships and things like that, and so all these things that are kind of not traditionally virtual, but we've been able to make work, and we have taken an approach where we want to be open safely. And so the focus, I think, that I have seen at this university from the top down has, and with a lot of new initiatives coming, on board and changes occurring, in our programs and at the university, but they've all been undergirded with the need for a safe environment. We want people to want to send their children here. We want non-traditional students to want to come here because they feel it's a safe environment. And so that has been driving, I think, a lot of the decisions here at George Mason. Yeah.
How have state policies in Virginia impacted what you do on campus, or have you done what you want to and it happens to also match the Virginia state requirements?
That's a really good question. We align pretty well with state policies. There's not a mask mandate in our state at this point, but we do require masks indoors on campus in classrooms because we have moved away from the 6-foot, spacing, and we're trying to, again, keep everybody safe, making the general assumption that people are vaccinated here as well. So we've aligned pretty well with the state. We do vary in some parts, and there are distinctly different approaches at other universities within the state, but we tended to err on the side of safety as a baseline for being open. We really wanted to be open. And so we didn't feel we didn't, put it bluntly, you don't want to end up on the front page of the Washington Post for having a major outbreak. So you want to do it in an appropriate way where you have a baseline of safety, but you can still open and provide a relatively traditional college experience to students. And so we aligned with what the state was promoting and projecting. We maybe went a little further in some areas, but we clearly were aligned with regard to offering testing and vaccinations. I mean, we've been really ahead of the curve on those items, but in alignment with the state policy.
Right. Well, Dr. Burt, I'll ask you a similar question, but can you back up a little bit and just tell us how things have started this semester, what precautions you're taking, if any, and then talk about what's going on in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a debate that being in Texas from every level of the government has politicized everything going on. And I'm not going to make a whole lot of political back and forth on this, but it has created a complication in operations to some degree. I don't want that to confuse like the individual schools or people, whether it be provosts or chancellors or whatever, support one way or another, but it has severely hindered capabilities of functioning to some degree, depending on where you feel like your personal safety and health is and where is that a priority to work. And it's been a major discussion. So for those who aren't aware, Texas basically does not have any requirements that you can place on the students. So students do not have to wear masks. Students do not have to be vaccinated. Students don't have to provide proof of those. Our university took the step in trying to make sure that everyone took a COVID test to see if you had COVID or not coming on campus. But that was a 4-week period to do that in. And so, I mean, it's a lot of, how valid is the test when you took it and all the things like that. Now, there's options. If students want to get a vaccine, they can get a vaccine on campus. That's not a problem. If students want to get tested for COVID, you can do that without a problem. So those services are available. But when I walk in my classroom, the students have the absolute option to not wear their mask, and that's how it goes. I personally wear my mask because I have young children at home. So that's more of just putting a barrier between me and that situation if I can help it. But, and it's interesting because the K through 12 has fought back heavily in my state. Multiple districts are suing back against this to allow masks to stay in classrooms and things like that. And so, but the university level really has not pushed back on this. They've kind of fallen in line with whether they agreed it or not, or how they've chosen to word things to be applying pressure. But yeah, there's no requirement. And so consequently, whether that can directly relate to the fact that I have not had a week where I haven't had a student have COVID in my class at some point. I will be frank in saying that most of my students at some point or the other, or at least a student is out because of COVID every week currently with the fall semester, if not more than one. And the nice thing is if I already do a lot of digital teaching by nature, just the age group I came into with university work. But a lot of people, thanks to COVID happening previously and completely having to learn the process, are able to make that shift pretty easily for students, hopefully. So,
can you talk about any other changes since March of 2020 that your program or college has gone through? Just backtracking to what happened when this pandemic started, or are you saying that really nothing changed much? And
I mean, it depends who you ask. Lots of people have seen changes, and I think we're supportive changes. I think as we talk through a few more topics we have, we'll see those come up. When it comes back to convenience, cost savings, making everything digital, I think a lot of times they're like, well, we're not going to, we want that on-person experience, but we're going to do this thing where we bring people on campus. We're going to do it digitally because it's very convenient for the institution. It's very cheap for the institution. So, and why I think that's going to be continued where we see a lot of marketing structures go. That's really been kind of the key factor. Now, the nice thing I have to say is the plethora of university professors, whether you have someone who's nearing retirement age all the way to a 29-year-old just hired out of a doctoral school, the push for understanding online usage, basically all these tools we've been paying for and not near using enough. We've had professors I've worked with who've never opened up their LMS or Blackboard for those, depending what system you use, never understood how to even use a grade book on there. So the students always had access to their grades. Well, now is the time to learn. And so my hope going forward is it seems like a lot of them have continued a lot of those things going forward. If they have to record a lecture, this is no longer a huge ordeal to figure out. They know how to open up Zoom or whatever they're using, make the recording, and then make it available to students. So my hope is this continues in the fact that for accessibility purposes, that would be amazing for students. That's just awesome. And I think that's something that we continue to look at more and more as we go forward.
Yeah, it sounds like a positive aspect of this pandemic, and that's what we're going to talk about next anyway. Do you have any other comments about lessons learned that you think is positive? Any opportunities? So I heard a couple of things that you said, so just go ahead with that if you have a few more things to add, and then we'll get to Dr. Baker.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to see shifting marketing is going to become more digital. I think we've been discussing this for 20 years in most industries. Some have made it, some haven't. I think that for higher ed, which I feel like things go more slowly, a lot of times that we'll see that continued use of digital marketing. And I think that comes back to consumers preferring convenience over anything else. That's not been lost on anyone who's taught business, whether it be in the sport industry or everywhere else. Convenience is king. And I think we're going to keep seeing that take place as we engage with our students going forward. I think, like I said, we'll see a lot of shifting in the marketing to digital resources, digital access. I think the virtual experience will become more of an ordeal, providing access. Like, don't wait for the student to have to make a 10-hour drive, show up, finally walk around the lab if anyone's available. No, we can record this, put it together, package it, and have it where students can go through it at their own leisure, and then provide the chance to interact with somebody and talk to them. And that professor, and it can be a professor, right? Usually we do this thing where people show up and like, well, let's see who's in their office so you can talk to somebody. But instead, we now can plan it and interact with people. And I think professors are a little more flexible with their time. I meet more with my students in the evening than I did before, still protecting family time where I can. But Zoom is one of those things where, like, if a student is absolutely panicking and there's room for it and it's possibly, sure, I can hit a button, flip it open, and have that conversation. I think it taught departments to be more interactive and utilize their social media more efficiently. I mean, here we are recording and we're going across in the time period, instead of doing just a Zoom meeting, which limits who can be on it, we are right now going across 3 different social media streams all at once. I think that's where we'll start looking for those key things, if we haven't already, to really be more accessible and to interact. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring up, if anyone's actually watching this on the different 3 social media streams, Feel free to comment. Most of your comments will feed into this program. If you have a question, you can put it in the comments. We'll put those at the end, and we can post them up before we can respond to them. So by all means. And so just to give an example, one, this wasn't a question, it was just a comment. We appreciate Darlene. We can easily showcase coming in from Facebook. We absolutely appreciate your support, so thank you. And so understand those kind of little things like that, which increase engagement, I think are going to be the key, absolute key going forward and building those new university experiences.
Yeah. Dr. Baker, do you have anything to add to that?
I completely agree with Daniel's assessment there. I think being intentional in examining and considering multiple modalities, we hadn't really, we're not a high flex kind of place, but we are about choice. And whether those students are sitting in the dorm or whether they're in another state, providing opportunities for choice, I think, is really important. We've learned about, in terms of lessons, the interest in the convenience of the virtual experience, what we can do to master it and make it better. It's not a matter of, and this is something I continually, promote. It's not a matter of taking a face-to-face class and trying to squeeze it into an online format. It's a different modality. It's a different structure in class. But we have become, and Daniel mentioned this, much more consumer-oriented and customer-oriented, looking at the experiences, even in terms of advising and having access not only to, for students that are on campus, maybe they need a face-to-face advisor, but we have a large number of students who need virtual advising. So we have to provide those supplementary services as well. And I think other lessons that I think come across in terms of the administrative components beyond the work of the university are, communication modes, the needs, the processes, how we're actually able to navigate and move forward, whether we're in a virtual or hybrid space or, in-person space, how those communication models can enhance our opportunity to move forward, actually.
And what impact has the pandemic had on student recruitment and retention? And we've touched on this just a little bit because you're talking about wanting to make sure your campus is open and that it's accessible, which can help with student retention. But I know that I've heard, of course, that numbers have gone down, or they did certainly last fall. So what's going on this year? Bob, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Overall for our university, we are actually at a record number. Significantly over 39,000. It varies by program. We saw a lot of increase in STEM areas and things like that with the technology, the use of technology. But I would say that overall enrollment is pretty stable across most programs. Some professions get hit a little harder than others during a pandemic like this, and yet I think the encouraging aspect of it is, and one of the things it's so much of it is about messaging to prospective students, and we have, as many of us do, a real variety of prospective students, from non-traditional career changers to students coming out of high school, traditional students, some that went online, some that went face-to-face, some, everything built around also getting experience prior to graduation from college. And so getting the message across, I think, requires, and Daniel referred to this before also, multiple channels. You got to be visible in the space that the learning is going to take place in as well. And if that's the virtual space, then you got to be there. And so with regard to the enrollment issues, sure, I look at it as, and it's partly a lesson learned as well. We have and are still coming through a crisis, and I don't. It's an entirely different crisis than 9/11, but 9/11. People looked at the sport industry, people looked at higher education, people looked at the travel industry, and people said, "Oh my, it's closing down. It's never been the same, but it actually rose like a phoenix in a way that was better than before." And I feel like with the lessons we can learn that will happen again in a response to a crisis. And I think that's the key, is that our response to crises, so yes, travel was impacted, sports were impacted, but people are hungry for them. And there are going to need to be professionals trained and prepared to manage the new, sports systems, the modern, the post-pandemic world. And I think that's what we should focus on and be here for. And I think those are the programs and the institutions that are going to thrive, because those things will come back and they will be begging for well-trained people. And that's what we're here to do. So, frankly, I do think that enrollment component will surge again, especially if we're coming back to and meeting the needs of our consumers, which are our students, and our employers who are hiring our students.
Right. We will definitely get back to that in more detail. So hold that thought. Yeah.
Sure.
So Dr. Burt, do you have any comments about recruitment and retention as it pertains to your university?
Yeah, not so much my institution per se, although it does apply. I think this is where we have to have that realistic conversation of separating the different types of institutions. When we're talking about our institutions or flagship schools of states, and I'm not trying to pick on any school, but say the University of Texas, University of Oklahoma, where we're talking about these major schools, you're not, I think, seeing as many problems when it comes to recruitment retention, because why some didn't have to, many just had to tweak their acceptance rate a little bit, or just change the rules a little bit for that temporary time, and suddenly you've solved your problem as far as tuition paying students coming in the door. I won't pick on a specific school, but a specific engineering oriented school I know of, located in the Northeast, literally just tweaked a single percent acceptance rate difference, and it solved their entire recruitment retention problem. That was it. Because that many people want to go to there. They want the name on their diploma. They want to do that. And so I think we have to have, that's one way to look at it. But that also affects the top level of the other schools in the state who are struggling with retention problems already, or struggling with recruitment problems. So that would be your regional institutions. In some cases, certain types of community colleges, as we've seen build outs happen with system schools. And they can be highly affected by this, because you have students who can't afford it because of job situations and they're paying out of pocket, or they are struggling they may be trying to get in or decide, can I take time away from my family to do this while we're all struggling? I had several students who went back into the workforce because between them, their parents, their siblings, it took all of them pulling together to financially make it through COVID, and so they had to stop because they couldn't afford to put down money for, fees and costs and things like that. And the way we do our education system here in the States, so for us, we're having to go after and try to recruit from those individuals who may not be able to afford it. Meanwhile, the students we normally have to operate sometimes at our top are automatically being recruited by now our flagship institutions to fill in their gaps. So you do have a little bit of starvation taking from both sides for regional institutions, which make up the majority of physical institutions in the US. And so I think, it's interesting to see. I think if you interview most people across like the R1s and flagships, they're going to come out and be like, well, it did go pretty well. It wasn't too bad. If you go back and interview a lot of our regional institutions, they're going to come back and be like, we're hurting. We're down 20%. We're down 15%. Or we're down 10%. And I think that it has to be mindful that those schools still provide a lot of the industry students that we have. as well as a lot of times fee to our graduate programs that we see at those R1 institutions. So I'm really curious to see how this pans out going forward. And we won't know right off the bat. It'll take 5, 6, 7 years to see their ramifications. But I do think they have to be mindful of that broad spectrum.
Right. And are we creating some sort of a gap where there will be a lack of a certain type of student who wants a certain type of job, and that those the recruitment won't be there for that type of job.
Yeah.
Students are going through the schooling. Yeah. I think we're seeing that in other areas as well, which is a little bit off topic, but I'll get back on topic. Let us talk about the sport industry. And Bob was referring to this before, but what impact has this pandemic had on the workforce? Not only the needs, but what kinds of changes do you foresee coming up? How has this impacted not only students last year, but students this year and then the next few years that are coming along?
If you want me to start with that, certainly there are going to be adaptations. I think as we've seen a dramatic change in the workplace and the workforce beginning to occur with the support of technology, sport is a unique entity in that, there are aspects of it that will require physical presence. There are other aspects of it that do not. I think balancing those, getting a handle on those, what are the constraints? What are the constants? You can look at, 110,000 people at college football games this fall. You don't do that without physical presence of staff and administration and management. And yet there are many lessons learned that we've kind of started to talk about from the virtual side of things and the technology side of things that can enhance the industry workforce in many different ways, whether it's from the marketing side or communication side or wherever. So I see a big role for technology and the evolution of technology. I also see the massive changes in the workforce in terms of the focus on performance outcomes, not inputs. From a systemic perspective, I think we're shifting to not an oversight of how the work gets done in a face-to-face manner, but an oversight of what gets done and when it gets done. And I think that is going to also both influence and be influenced by overall market changes. The marketplace is changing. The expectation of access to technologies that either exist or don't exist at this point in time, but that are going to be integrated into the sport experience for individuals, whether it's a variety of stakeholders, whether it's the consumer or whether it's the producer or manager of those sport activities. So I think there's going to be a huge impact on the sport industry, but much like that 9/11 situation, where we said, oh my gosh, what's it going to be like? Well, it evolved to, are we more secure at sporting events than we were? Yes, probably. As a result of that, are there procedures and things that we have come to not only accept, but expect? I think that will happen. But I do believe, so I'm not, egotistical enough to sit here and pretend that I can project all the changes that will occur, but I can pretty unequivocally say there will be changes ongoing as a result of this pandemic that we can take as opportunities, hopefully, to evolve, our sport industry in all of its different aspects. People have discovered that they really miss spectator sports, that they really miss in some ways, certain participatory aspects of recreational sports. I mean, there are a lot of things that this could, provide new energy into a sport industry as well. And so I see the positive there too.
Right. Yeah, on many different levels, not just professional sports, of course, but children playing soccer. Everybody misses that all of a sudden after all of the Saturday games and having to travel. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Burt, what would you like to say about this topic?
Man, so this is an interesting topic. Knowing we were going to discuss this, I reached out to several people I know in the industry. Some were former students who survived through COVID through the industry. They made it through. Others who just work in the industry I've met along the past decade or so. And it was interesting conversations, to say the least, because their job shut down for a year in theory. So the question is, what happened? Who survived? Who didn't survive? And I know we're probably going to ask a question, our thoughts on this going forward. So I'll save any future perspectives on it to a second from now. But when we look at what took place in the last year, so ignoring professional sports, absolutely watching, things like, Pee Wee football, little leagues, all this stuff get decimated. I think we learned really how much we value sport as a society, which, I mean, as an export that's very high on our list economically, I think we should recognize that. But I think we realize some advantage is giving to our psychosocial structures and the benefits that we have throughout the lifespan of whether we're talking about old man softball, so to speak, or, going out to the park with friends, family, grandparents, and playing things like, Frisbee, or whether it be something simple as Frisbee golf or whatever, or whether it be something simple as our kids engaging with each other, talking, learning about competition, learning about what sportsmanship is, and these broad concepts that we consider part of becoming a good citizen and a good person to interact with others. But then we have the professional sport industry, which responds because of the fact that there's a profit margin that makes a huge difference. And I think what we should take away from it, from the sport management field, is we really need to sit down and say, what did we equip our students with to survive a situation like that when the industry takes a hit? And I will sit down and point out my view of this is look, we're going to see a huge resurgence, I think, in jobs opening, but I think that resurgence is going to be something like sales. And so when I brought that up, I'm like, well, all the jobs being developed are sales. Immediately, everyone came back that was still working for their professional organizations. And these are organizations like the NFL, MLB, I'll leave names out. But with that, they came back and just said specifically, well, sure, they got all fired immediately the moment we shut down. So what do you think we're hiring for? It's not that they individually people don't have value. It's just as a department, it was less value because there's nothing to sell you. So as far as going to a game, so ticket sales becomes a question we have to ask in our field that there will be jobs in, but what are we training our students to do? And the students and individuals I talked to who were very successful developed niche skills that became highly marketable and of value when they were there. Knowing how certain software programs work. Individuals who they minored or focused on accounting. So they went into sports one way and eventually utilized accounting to get into the accounting department, became massively valuable at that point because they're trying to figure out how to move money around to get the entire organization to survive. People who were in media, suddenly now we went fully digital. All those media people who've been trying to figure out how to interact with people, engage, and been fighting for $1 to do so, were suddenly said, you're highly important. We need you to have your laptop open. You're working remote, but you have to be engaged, whether it be pro shops and other things like that. And how do we engage people and keep them going? And suddenly the professional opinion mattered. The amount of people I know who work in some form of tech or tech field inside stadiums and became the most important of all time. How do we run a wire, connect this, make this speaker work, shoot this up to the bigger screen? How do we take care of this? And so I think that's when we take a look at what we preparing our students to do. If we're talking about longevity in the sport management field, those are keys that we need to take away from this.
Right.
Because I have a lot of students who do work in sales as well. But most of those never plan on staying in sports. They're using it as a tabletop discussion on their resume. So when they walk into their next job, they can say, I worked for this pro team or I worked for this NFL team. And it becomes a talking point because people are fans in your state. And, it never comes off your resume for 20 years, even though you only spent like a season. And so I think that's one of those discussions we really have to have is, are we preparing them? Because the chance of something like this or something that is related is always possible. And so we have to have that conversation.
Right. Well, we can easily move forward now to talk about what you think might happen, not only in the short term future, but maybe in the longer term future, which I know you don't have crystal balls and whatnot. But I guess also as somebody, obviously as the person in charge of the accrediting body, trying to predict what students should be taught, and we keep it very broad and we keep it very open, as you know, but is the accrediting body helping those students be prepared by making them learn a little bit about everything? As you're saying, Dr. Burt, it seems like then some of those skills come out and are very important. So you don't have to focus on, of course, the accrediting body, but the preparation of students in the variety of ways that it does happen in sport management programs. How is that going to prepare them for the sport industry that they're actually going to be in when they graduate and beyond? Go ahead.
I think when I ask, because here's my real question, right, that I have for individuals in the industry, how are you going to take my interns? That's the short version. Let's cut it down to the bare bones basic. The bottom line is, I need my interns with you. How does that happen? And two discussions came about this. The first discussion was the fact that things like internships necessarily are not being filled at the rate they were before. Income has not come back at the rate it was before. That's a concern that takes place. One group of people I was talking to that work in the media department, historically, they've hired like 20 people. And over the course of the season, they cut it down to 10. It feels very cutthroat, but they've had that room to do so. And those 10 people get a lot of mentorship on that back half and a lot more paying hours. That's not abnormal, depending on which organization you're working with. But when I asked, okay, so going forward, what are you going to take? They said 4. I said, okay, so now we've got a problem. We have an issue where I definitely have more than 4 interns if I was just putting it with one organization. But now I've got 4 interns and competing with every other school in my area. So now what? I said, so what's the difference is going to be between the organizations? And it really comes down to, and they were very frank with this, who you know. I know we joke about this in classrooms, and more importantly, who knows you? Have you built a relationship with the people who are controlling the internships? And so as much as we don't always like to do so, and as much as we may take our institution historic background or prestige, I think we'll be taking it for granted a little bit if we assume all those matter going forward. Those relationships, I think, need to be rebuilt, need to be continued, and you need to make space for that organization to operate inside your institution, whether it be they show up for a day and talk about sports stuff, and we hand out goodie bags, whether you show up, you take them out for lunch to talk to them. And it's not about trying to bribe your way into this. It's just about trying to engage them, because the money is tight enough at the moment that, to use the phrase, the devil you know, would be far more likely to be the case. We rather know where these people are coming from, these interns are coming from, what their background is, what their professors believe about the industry and what they've been trained for, than take a risk on what may be a great resume, but we really don't know past that. And so when they say we go from 20 to 4, they've become very concerned about the quality of those 4 people, because they don't get to move them around afterwards. The people you didn't take, you're not cutting anymore. You don't get to go back and do recalls. You don't know what's going to happen with those people. So that was what they raised as their concern. And to be fair, most of those people are mid-level managers inside the industry. They don't like it either. They prefer having a large plethora of interns to work with and sort through and mentor. But that's what's being approved budgetly for a lot of these places that I discussed with. And so I don't know if that's going to apply to every organization out there, to what extent. I don't want to take that as a broad scope. It's all going to be, but that was the concerns that were raised to me.
And so how do you place all of the students that are not then being placed at that one internship site? Where do they go?
Well, from my point, I buy a lot of lunches with a lot of people, so to have conversations. Because, I mean, I think sometimes walking in and asking just, what is it you want them to know and what do you need them to know, becomes a really great question, and that's where we start with that process. And so, developing those relationships with major league teams, minor league teams, depending how your school's set up, if you have like apprenticeships or early internships that lead to later internships, building those relationships and resumes are absolute key factors, whether it be shadowing or whether it be involved, because the sport industry is not sitting down and saying, well, you got a sport management degree, you're good to go. While we're just now getting to the point where we're seeing a lot more sport management degrees or sport business degrees in the actual industry, their mindset's never been about how many A's do you have. It's never been about, can you show up to work? Do you know what you're talking about? Can we work with you? Are you teachable? And, so that, why they're not at the point where like, well, it just takes heart. It doesn't. But those relationships exist. And so I think building them, I can't stress, it has to not be, we showed up for one day, we had some people talk, we took a tour. They have to know you as the coordinator, the program graduate, however you are set up in that leadership position. They need to know who you are personally. And I can't stress that seemed to be the biggest concern they had when they want to put these relationships together.
Bob, what do you have to say about that?
I agree with the insights that Daniel's sharing. I talk to our students and frankly our tremendous group of colleagues that life is a contact sport, and this is the nature of the business. I will touch briefly on the fact that in terms of the accreditation and its scope of content, I'm a big believer in both that skill development and the context within which you're developing the skill. So I support that conceptually of having a context. In fact, we even I like to take it beyond to what are the relationships of sport to recreation and tourism and entertainment and other industries as well, in terms of those crossover kinds of skills as well. We do focus a lot on professional development, and I think that's a key when Daniel talks about early experiences, field-based kind of things, about building relationships with industry. I think it's critical. I have seen more and more, much like you referred to, more and more industry officials, hiring agents, and so forth, who are representative of the growing number of sport management degrees in the industry. And so that does help. It's not an immediate, well, we don't want that. It is well, I have a degree, but I want to make sure the person has the right skills. It's still about the person and the skills that are coming in there. I do think, it's important for us to think about in terms of areas. And I think you absolutely have, hit a critical area with sales. I would add to that the idea of metrics, sport analytics. I think organizations, especially if we're going to be outcomes focused in our systems, we're going to care more about the outputs than the inputs in essence. Then I really think that being equipped for the use of metrics for decision making and informing strategy, I think that's going to be critical. And I'm talking about it in a way that may be distinct. What I have seen and experienced in talking with people across a lot of different sport organizations and levels is that the biggest issue, and it's not just in sport, this is really across all data analytics. The biggest issue with analytics is the people who are doing the analyses might not be fully in tune with the sport industry, the knowledge of sport, the knowledge of management, and those who are making the decisions, they're not getting useful data in a way that it can inform their decisions. So there's a huge disconnect. You have people over here who understand analytics and people over there who have to make decisions, and there's no communication between. Well, I think the translation of those metrics for decision makings is going to be a skill that if students come out with a comprehension, not of being a data analyst necessarily, but of understanding data enough to be able to utilize it in informing decisions while understanding the industry within which they are using it and the processes, procedures, and goals and objectives and things like that, then I think those people will be incredibly marketable. So that would be another area that I would add to the sales kind of area. But I do think, it's a balance between understanding the industry and having the opportunity to not only be exposed to the skills, but to develop those skills in practice. And that's, so taking professional development within the academic program to a new level is, I think, that's one of the number one. I think there have been some studies done in the past. One of the number one things that always comes out in terms of what makes for a good candidate, well, experience. And so we have to put them in a position to get that experience in a valid and meaningful way. So I'm just reinforcing, I think, everything that Daniel said in that, and I truly do believe that. I think it's critical. As we're moving forward, it's not going to be like 2019 was, but it's not going to be like 2020 was either. It's going to be something new, and the exciting part is we probably get a chance to shape some of that, and if we're working with the industry to help shape that, what are their needs? I love the fact that we going out and talking to the people there. What are they seeing? What are they projecting? What are their needs? Where are their deficiencies? We can help answer those questions. That's what we can do through both some cooperative and collaborative research, but also through those internships, which then benefits our students to a great degree as well. So, yeah.
I actually want to add something to what Bob said. I think that's extremely important. He brought up analytics, and it's a broad topic, right? We could be talking about player development. We could be talking about money. I think to some degree, this has to be seriously discussed in how we handle analytic thinking and analytics use. And the reason I bring this up was because I had a former student who, a few years ago, right before COVID, who works in media, was, again, we all know entry-level paying jobs, not really great in the sport industry because everyone wants to belong to a team, everyone's willing to wear the shirt, and they're willing to take no pay and live in the city for it. So, but this person had done really well, niched their skill, absolutely deserved a raise to be able to do their function. And they were told, fine, define how you create value. And I think that's the discussion we sometimes need to make sure we have, because this person was very frustrated that someone who worked in certain aspects of the finance, the sales, the sponsorship had no problem saying, here's the dollar amount I brought in, we're done. They now had to say, okay, how do the videos, marketing tools, and things like that create value when I don't have the information connect to dollar amounts? And while they're excellent, they're brilliant, they did a great job. They did call me in a panic right off the bat when they were told that afternoon. And we walked through discussing it a little bit and came up with some ideas, but they executed flawlessly and it worked out. With that being said, though, that has to be that conversation. While we are training a lot of our students for entry-level positions, it's not fair that we don't put those into considerations for training them beyond entry-level positions when they have to actually fight for the dollar that they're going to have, including talking about leveraging teams. I think I've had 4 or 5 students, the only way they've ever gotten a raise was they leveraged one team versus another across sports. They just were good at what they did and found a way to get 2 people to value them. And that's the quickest way. We're not talking about $2,000, $3,000. They're going up by tens of thousands of dollars once that happens, because no one wants to retrain someone in something that's complicated. So I think those discussions have to be had and how to at least analyze your situation that you might be going into. So.
Okay.
Do you want to say anything else?
No, I'm just saying I really like that. I completely agree with that. That was a great example. And yeah, I think that's a really valid and important point.
So what characteristics do some sport organizations and also higher ed institutions have that put them in the best position to handle this pandemic and the change in sport industry and higher education and moving forward?
Yeah. Well, I think one is their ability to grasp those kinds of measures and metrics to get a handle on those things is very helpful. So they understand where they are. they are able to develop a vision for where they want to go. But again, it has to be adaptable, because certain things that we were planning 5 years ago are probably not as meaningful as they were 5 years ago, right? And certain other things that we weren't planning need to be strategically pursued. I'm a big proponent, and I say this all the time, and people around here I think are very used to me saying it, but we have to. I'm a big fan of being strategic, but I'm also a big fan of being opportunistic. I think we have to be both opportunistic and strategic. And those organizations that are willing to do that can be flexible to stakeholder needs. Stakeholders being potentially the consumers, the employees, the management. I mean, everybody involved, all those stakeholders, the partners that they work with, and so forth. Being flexible to those needs, being adaptable to the circumstances, the environment, being secure in and equipped to use metrics to be able to understand where they stand, what their outcomes actually are, being able to, employ multiple modalities effectively, if it's a higher education institution, for example, or take advantage of technologies that are current and evolving. I think those are the kind of, flexibility is going to be critical. Communication is going to be critical. And if I had to use one word, it would have to be adaptability. Things are going to change. Got to be adaptable.
Yeah. Dr. Burt?
I absolutely agree. I think adaptability is going to be key. If we're going to talk about higher ed specifically, well, probably in the sport industry too, but if we're going forward talking about this, I think stretching adaptability also leads into the concept of accessibility. As we have absolutely seen, you can't do what you do in the classroom and just flip it on outside. It's not the same. You can't. It's not possible. We've pitched online learning is perfect. It's not a problem. We all should be able to move that route. And then we got forced to do it, and it went over horrendously. But we also have to separate the theory behind that from the actual delivery. And that was part of the problem, is people were not prepared to go online fully. They weren't prepared to engage in the technology. They weren't prepared how to utilize or leverage it. Certainly no one had built the infrastructure usually to do this, even at bigger institutions. No one had that plan in mind because you didn't see it coming. And so I think, as we go forward, we have the hardware concerns of the technical capability to make those shifts when we need to make those shifts, to have access that, faculty aren't sitting there going, I don't know how to mute my students. I don't even have a web camera. Where do you get those anyway? Like, to move beyond those aspects, to then focus on things like talking about the concepts of universal design. And for those people who go into pedagogy, they understand exactly, because we hear this all the time, or if you teach at higher ed, you should be hearing this all the time. That the idea of that we're not just being inclusive, but we're integrating. That when we start and design a course, a lecture, a topic, we are making sure it's accessible for all. We're not designing it, then afterwards figuring out, well, if someone is visually impaired, how would they access it? No, we take that into account before we put it up. And that way we're not debating how to be accessible to all, because we don't know what we're going to have to adapt for. No longer relying on the fact that, well, I'll just go make some copies here, or I'll just make this minor adjustment here. That's not being fair to our students, And so I think going forward, that needs to really be a focus on that we deal with. And it's interesting because now we're also having that argument in the sport industry. I've heard a few conversations come up with, well, now we're having to make all these adjustments, but these aren't very easy to make adaptable. So, and they don't work very well in being inclusive. So how do we make adjustments and still stay inclusive and stay within like Section 504 and ADA compliance and so forth? And I think, while I'm not trying to pick on disability specifically, I think that is just one of those things that we have to really consider, is making sure that whether we're talking about students who may or may not have internet access, which we've never had those discussions before, tough for the student, right? Show up to the library. Now we're like, well, that doesn't work anymore. Starting with student first when it comes to the higher education proponent. And I don't only support the concept of treating them like a consumer, because there's a difference, I think, and a relationship difference that should exist between teacher and student. But I do think that doesn't change the fact that we want them to be successful. I don't know a single professor who doesn't actually want their students to be successful, that this is a business transaction, you checked out, whatever. No, because their success is our success every step of the way. And so I think, again, universal design from the forefront, being adaptable, like Bob was encouraging, creating those options for access. And I do think we do have to have those conversations on what are our students going to do when they leave? Are we designing programs that develop them to be good at what they need to be? Both the hard skills of understanding law situations, how to utilize Excel, how to do certain things, how to handle budgeting, money, analytics, and so forth, those different topics, as well as the soft skills of, do you know how to walk in, dress appropriately, and give a good handshake, and at least put on a good smile for at least the 5 minutes you're going to have an interview, if not longer, you know? And so I think we really need to look at our outcomes, look at how outcomes may have shifted, and start adjusting for them. But realizing that, you know, generically hoping we teach all these things and students don't really develop a specific field may also be a problem too. So again, I think those relationships with the industry that we tend to engage with the most, whatever team or professional organization, and that could be anywhere from the pros all the way down to little leagues, whoever you work with, even on a recreational scale, what do they need? What do they value? And how do we fit within that paradigm or creation of ideas to work together to develop a good spot for our interns to go into?
Right. You know, I love when you talk about outcomes because of COSMA's outcomes assessment focused process. So hopefully that is helping to get faculty to think about things in those terms. You know, what do we want to happen? What is the student prepared to do? What have they learned? What skills do they have? That's what we want to focus on in how we prepare them to meet those outcomes. Absolutely. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to check in if we have any comments or questions we want to address live, or shout out to Dr. Kluka again or anything like that.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I know this was also being shout out possibly to class, but by all means, shoot a question in. We'll gladly answer it if we can. I think it's like I said, I know that people also may not know how to do that, so that creates its own issue, but just open up the comment section, type in the comments feed into the program we have here, and I can post your comment up and ask a question. So if you have any, feel free to ask. And while we're waiting to see if anyone decides to ask any, additionally, this whole webinar will be available afterwards. It's currently being recorded, but within 2 to 3 hours, it will be compressed and placed on YouTube permanently for people to review that way. So everyone will be able to access it later if you want someone else to go watch it.
Right. And any final comments? Dr. Baker, Dr. Burt, either of you?
Well, I will say one of the things that I think struck me that Daniel summarized there with regard to higher ed is applicable certainly for us in sport management, but certainly in the industry. Is you know, we're not just in the business of meeting our consumer needs, that we're in the business of success. And we want our students to be successful, and whatever that looks like for them, that's part of our role. And how we get there is really, you know, we're at a stage right now that we're redefining that. And so I think that to me is very exciting. And I do think COSMA has a role in that. You know, the idea of the underpinnings that upon which all of our industries are going to be built, from inclusivity to the technologies that are going to we're going to be dependent upon, and other, you know, there are so many things that are going to go into what our future looks like, whether as a institution of higher education or whether as a sport organization that we're preparing our students to go into. And so I find this a really exciting time, and half glass full, I'm going to say that we will come out of this taking advantage of the crises that we've had to go through for the last year and a half, and be better because of it if we're intentional about it. And I think we have to be intentional. So I'll leave with that.
Fantastic.
No, I support that. I think there are a serious discussion that has to happen, that you only see growth once you actually have, you know, problems take place. And I think that Dr. Baker's straight on that, you know, we now have to self-reflect. Are we doing what we need to do to meet that growth? Now, we do have a question coming in, so I'm going to pop that up. real quick. It's also from Darlene. Thank you so much for reaching out to us. We appreciate it. It should be here on the screen here. The question is, there are a number of universities that are offering hybrid courses. How does it fit into upcoming curriculum design? Is this type quite helpful?
I'm happy to jump in first. We were actually on a path to offering a sort of menu of choice for our students, so that they could take some online classes, they could take some hybrid classes, they could take some face-to-face classes, and that as enrollment elevates, then the option to offer multiple sections of courses. And again, I'm not talking about a high flex model where you're trying to do everything in one class. I have not found that to be particularly effective yet. It's certainly not for any of the instructors that I've worked with, or students that I've worked with for that matter. But I have found that having flexibility and choice in the modalities offered has been really popular among students. We have students who are living on campus, who take a online class and then go to a face-to-face class. We have been able to shift. We're in an area in Northern Virginia where traffic, and Heather is well aware of this, where traffic is pretty intense. If they can, if for some people saving 2 hours in the car enables them to further expand their education, that they may not have had that opportunity if they had to do it face-to-face. So we've tried to create actual, hybrid classes. We've tried to create face-to-face classes, and we've tried to create online classes. And I have found that students' feedback to me has been that they love hybrid courses, and that for further curriculum design, I mean, we're looking at the use of of simulations and all kinds of things within our classes that can further enhance any of those modalities, essentially. But again, for me, it comes back to the idea that it's not a matter of taking a face-to-face class and trying to plug it into a different modality. It's designing, as Daniel had said, with regard to inclusivity and everything else, it's designing a class for that modality. And we've been very fortunate that we have worked with instructional designers across the university in order to make that happen. So I think there is definitely a place for it in the future. That's, again, thanks for the question, Dara.
I will bring up, I was gonna say, I'm only gonna comment briefly because there's one other question to ask on this too. But I do think actually, my honest view is this is maybe a discussion that Cosmo needs to have. Again, we're in a whole new area altogether. So, how higher education is going to change, because it is to a point, needs to be reviewed. And so I think that's where we're gonna go ahead and see what happens. I will put up the second question, which I think is actually an excellent question also that Darlene asked. And so what are your thoughts on skill stacking as a curricular pedagogical notion? And the short version of it is the students, or I should say, treat them like they're young. The students who are middle management, but no longer my students by miles, I think they've absolutely utilized this. The problem is how to put it together in a curriculum is always going to be a discussion, right? I think it is a complex thing that if one of us could solve this perfectly, that would be the textbook, that would be the supplemental textbook to your intro to sport management class instantly. But in talking to everyone I know who's just passed their entry level, they've absolutely had to survive, to function, to go from the entry person being taught to doing everything. And so I think it's an absolute necessity. But then we have to have that discussion on well, how competent in a skill do you have to be? Why we're not talking about mastery, to what level? And so for a lot of them in middle management, they're trying to figure out HR issues, PR issues, how to sell their own selves from the financial standpoint, but also how to bring their people under them up financially to take care of them so they don't lose them. And so it's such a plethora of skill development that takes place. But yeah, I think it's an absolute necessity. I wish I had an answer on how that would happen, and as far as perfectly. but I think it's something we have to focus on. I didn't know if Dr. Baker, you had further thoughts on that.
No, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with that. I totally agree.
All right. Any other questions or anything? I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I think that's, no, I have 3 buttons up here because I'm doing this. And
Yeah, you had to have one of those this time anyway.
Right. I think that's all the questions we have so far. Thank you, Darlene, for asking. And again, like I said, in the future, we should be running programs like this going forward so people can engage as much as possible with us. So, Heather, I didn't know if you had any other announcements.
Well, we will have another session on October 19th that will be talking about some diversity and inclusive initiatives at Wichita State University. And so if you're connected to COSMA, you will hear about that. But I really, really want to thank both of you for spending the time today and for being flexible and demonstrating just how emergencies occur and you have to jump and do something else as we had planned to do this last week. And for all of the great information I think that you're providing to our constituents, both in higher ed and also in the industry about what's actually going on in the classroom so they know who they're getting when they're hiring everybody.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Daniel. Really enjoyed it, and it, I think these are extremely valuable. I'll echo Daniel and you both in saying that, yeah, these are a great service. I think I'll certainly be listening.
Absolutely. I appreciate both of you. It's been an excellent discussion. I'm also putting my email at the bottom. The reason why is if anyone has topics specifically they want to discuss or turn into a webinar, I'm currently creating a little bit buffer that can easily be passed on to Heather. So if you want to be a little more anonymous for COSMA, you can send it to me. I'll take care of it and pass it along. Any topic you want to talk about, then we'll figure out who would be best to sit on it, who to have that discussion, and provide that opportunity in the future. So.
Thanks.
With that, we'll sign off. So have a good day, everyone. Appreciate you, and thank you for your support, COSMA.